Hello and welcome to the Storm Scripture. This lesson is a look at the ways in which the writings of the prophet Zechariah overlap with the book of Revelation. I'll be looking at much of the book of Zechariah, the minor prophet, but we'll be skipping the parts that seem particularly to do with his immediate context in the days of Zerubbabel and the rebuilding of the temple, and I will be focusing on the passages that have echoes in the book of Revelation. I'm sure there are more to be found than the ones I will cover, but I'm going to hit all the most obvious ones and the ones that I have particularly paid attention to as I have been walking through the book of Revelation. If you discovered this lesson by looking up Zechariah or seeing it in a place out of its original context, I did record this lesson while I was walking through Revelation. In fact, I have just finished Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 6, which discusses the millennium. And I am about to get into Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 and 8, which discuss Gog and Magog. I believe that the last chapter of Zechariah has a lot to say about that particular passage in the book of Revelation, explaining both the millennium and what follows after it with Gog and Magog. I want to thank you for joining me as we examine the treasures in the intertextuality between Zechariah and Revelation. Zechariah is one of the primary prophets of the Old Testament who provides background information to what's going on in the book of Revelation. Zechariah has been alluded to or partially quoted since chapter 1 and at many points since then. So what I'd like to do is a walk through Zechariah in Revelation, looking at passages from the minor prophet, and then talking about how those passages form the background to what we've been reading in Revelation. Zechariah chapter 1, verses 8 through 17. I had a vision in the night, and look, a man riding on a red horse. And he was standing between the myrtle shrubs that were in the ravine, and behind him were red, reddish-brown, and white horses. And I asked, "What are these, my Lord?" And the angel who was talking with me said, "I will show you what these are." The man standing between the myrtle shrubs answered and said, "These are those whom Yahweh has sent to patrol the earth." And they answered the angel of Yahweh who was standing between the myrtle shrubs, and they said, "We have patrolled the earth, and look, all the earth is dwelling in peace." The angel of Yahweh answered and said, "O Yahweh of hosts, how long will you have no compassion on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, with which you showed fury these 70 years? With gracious and comforting words, Yahweh answered the angel who was talking to me. And the angel who was talking to me said to me, "Proclaim, saying, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, I am very jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion, and I am extremely angry with the nations that are at ease, for while I was a little angry, they furthered disaster. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, I have returned to Jerusalem with compassion. My temple will be built in it, declares Yahweh of hosts, and a measuring line will be stretched out over Jerusalem. Proclaim again, saying, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, my cities shall again overflow from prosperity, and Yahweh will comfort Zion again, and he will choose Jerusalem again." There are several key points here that overlap what we've read in Revelation, although some of what this angel of the Lord says to Zechariah applies most pertinently to his immediate situation in the post-exile period, while the temple was partially constructed, but the work on finishing it had halted, and one of Zechariah's prophetic callings was to get the temple finished. And I believe that's part of the message at the end of this about the temple being built in it. They should get back on task and finish building the temple. But there are also some echoes of what we've seen in Revelation. For example, 4 colorful horses. These horses are not the same colors as the 4 horses in Revelation chapter 6, but there are 4 horses and 4 horsemen, and they are dispersed over the earth. In Zechariah, they are dispersed to patrol the earth. In Revelation 6, they are sent to position themselves in the four corners of the earth by the four living creatures. And the question that's raised by the angel of the Lord, how long will you not have compassion, is echoed in the words of the martyrs in Revelation 6:10 with the fifth seal, how long, holy and true Lord, will you not judge? So in both cases, God is not doing something that is expected. And the question is, how long will that last until he does what he is expected to do? I should maybe point out that it sounds to our ears like a good thing that the earth is at peace back in Zechariah chapter 1. However, the problem is that these nations all around Israel and all around Jerusalem have been harassing and oppressing the Israelites and the people in Jerusalem. And for them to have peace suggests that they are not getting recompense for how they've been treating Israel. They're getting away with it. And that's why them being at peace is a problem. And God says he is going to do something about those nations and show them justice for what they've done to Israel, just as he assures those martyrs in Revelation 6 that he is going to avenge their blood, just not immediately as he gives them the white robes. In Ezekiel 1, we see the idea of measuring Jerusalem. In Revelation 21, John actually sees an angel measuring Jerusalem in 21:15, and in 21:22 there's a mention of a temple. God tells Zechariah that there will be a temple in Jerusalem, and that relates to the fact that they were rebuilding a physical temple in Jerusalem at the time. In John's vision, though, which I believe is after the temple is destroyed again, after the second temple is wiped away by the Romans, he does not see a temple in the New Jerusalem because the Lord himself is the temple. The Lord and the Lamb are the temple. So there is a temple, just not a physical structure. Instead, God himself provides the temple. There's a note in Zechariah 1 about prosperity in Jerusalem and the surrounding cities. And the New Jerusalem is also prosperous in 21, 25, and 26. John says the gates of the New Jerusalem will never be shut by day, for there will be no night there, and they will bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. Jerusalem appears to be a bustling city that is kind of like New York City's catchphrase, the city that never sleeps. And Jerusalem is a city that never sleeps because the doors are never shut and it is never night there because God and the Lamb provide the light. Let's move on to Zechariah chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And I looked up and I saw, and look, a man, and in his hand was a measuring rope. And I asked, where are you going? And he answered me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is its width and what is its length. And look, the angel who was talking to me was coming forward, and another angel was coming forward to meet him. And he said, run and say to that young man, Jerusalem shall be inhabited like villages without walls, because of the multitude of people and animals in its midst. And I will be for it a wall of fire all around, declares Yahweh, and I will be the glory in its midst. There is not a wall, a physical wall around Jerusalem. There is a wall, but it's a wall that is God himself. He is going to be a wall. He calls himself a wall of fire all around it, because it's going to be like villages without walls because of the multitude of people and animals in its midst. There are going to be too many people for a wall to work because it's going to be overpopulated. So you're going to need the space, and walls are not going to be functional for a city that is so populous that you can't fence the people in because there's just too many people and animals in Jerusalem. In Revelation, Jerusalem has a wall too, but in Revelation 21:16, we read that the measurements of those walls are remarkably huge. He says, The city is laid out as a square, and its length is the same as its width. And he measured the city with the measuring rod at 12,000 stadia. The length and the width and the height of it are equal. These are just humongous magnitude of measurements for the width and the length. It would basically cover the entire Mediterranean Sea basin, all the lands around it, from Jerusalem to Rome to Spain, including Egypt. The walls here are so large, they encompass all of the known world, basically, from a Roman perspective. And the height is equal to the width and the length. And we're going to talk more about the symbolic meaning of the measurements of the city. But the point is that it is so big, it might as well not have walls, because the walls are as big as the populated area of the earth, as it was known in John's day. So the walls are around everything, and everybody's living in it. So it's a picture of a city that is basically without walls, because it includes all of the world. A little later in Zechariah chapter 2, we read this in verses 6 and 7. Woe, woe, flee from the land of the north, declares Yahweh, for I have scattered you like the four winds of the heavens, declares Yahweh. Woe, Zion, escape, you inhabitants of the daughter of Babylon. I'm not going to try to put Zechariah's prophetic words in their full context, because we're not doing a study of Zechariah. I'm just pulling out these passages that connect with Revelation. And this call to flee from Babylon is clearly echoed in Revelation 18, when the voice calls out, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins, so that you will not receive her plagues." The idea of fleeing or getting out of Babylon is echoed from Zechariah 2 and Revelation 18. The next passage is going to be a rather long one, Zechariah chapter 4, verses 1 through 14. The reason I'm quoting this at length is because Zechariah weaves together two different kinds of images, and I don't want to try to separate them two out, but they all kind of go together the way Zechariah puts it. It's hard to tease it out and still have it make sense. It's a little confusing even when you quote it in its entirety. But I want to quote it and then point out what the parts that connect with different pieces in the book of Revelation. So this is Zechariah chapter 4. The angel who was talking with me returned, and he wakened me as one who is wakened from sleep. And he said to me, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see, and look, a lampstand, all of gold, and a bowl was on its top, and its 7 lamps on it, and 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on its top. And there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl, and the other on the left." And I answered and said to the angel who was talking to me, "What are these, my Lord?" And the angel who was talking with me answered and said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." And he answered and said to me, "This is the word of Yahweh to Zerubbabel, saying, not by strength and not by power, but only by my spirit, says Yahweh of hosts. Who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become level ground, and he will bring out the top stone amid the shouts of grace, grace to it. And the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, the hands of Zerubbabel have founded this house, and his hands will finish it. And you will know that Yahweh of hosts has sent me to you. For whoever has despised the day of small things will rejoice and will see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. These 7 are the eyes of Yahweh, which are ranging throughout the whole earth. And I answered and said to him, what are these 2 olive trees, on the right of the lampstand and on the left? And I replied a second time and asked him, what are these 2 twigs of olive trees, beside the 2 golden pipes that pour forth from themselves the golden oil? And he replied to me, do you not know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord. And he said, these are the 2 anointed ones standing by the Lord of the whole earth. Zerubbabel is likely one of the two anointed ones because he's mentioned in the context. And at the tail end of chapter 3, there's another vision that involves a high priest named Joshua that was priest at the time that Zerubbabel was the governor. The assumption is that the two anointed ones are Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest. And the middle part about the great mountain is understood by many, and I think makes sense to describe it as a mound of rubble of the temple when it was destroyed. And in order to rebuild the temple, they were going to need to reuse some of the rubble from the previous temple and some of the surrounding buildings. And the Great Mountain is just this huge pile of rubble that has to be sorted through and then reorganized and reused in the rebuilding of the temple. The promise is that Zerubbabel will accomplish this task. The plumb line in his hand is a symbol of getting the work going again, to measure the walls and get everything back in order. And so the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel is success in rebuilding the temple. Is going to happen by the work of the Spirit as well as the work of the hands of Zerubbabel and the people with him. But we see the lamps and the olive trees and these eyes come up again in Revelation. The connection with the eyes seems to be with the lamps. The 7 lamps on this bowl are the eyes which range throughout the whole earth. And we see something like that in Revelation chapter 4, verse 5. From the throne came out lightnings and sounds and thunders, and 7 torches of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. Even though the 7 lamps are not specifically called 7 spirits, it is the vision of the lamp that is explained as the message to Zerubbabel, by my Spirit will these things be done. So the Spirit is represented in the vision, and that would be in the lampstand with the 7 lamps on it. That seems to connect the idea of the Spirit with the 7 lamps or 7 torches. This also makes a connection to eyes in Revelation 5:6. I saw in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures and in the midst of the elders a lamb standing as though slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent into all the earth. That phrasing of the 7 spirits sent into all the earth connects with the eyes from Zechariah chapter 4, sent into all the earth. And then the 2 olive trees connect with the 2 witnesses in chapter 11. The only explanation we have for the identity of the 2 witnesses is in chapter 11, verse 4. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. Throwing the lampstands in there is an interesting variation because in the vision of Zechariah, there is 1 lampstand, and that 1 lampstand represents God himself, in front of whom are the 2 olive trees on its left and on the right. The 2 olive trees stand before the Lord of the earth, represented by that lampstand. But here, the 2 witnesses are also said to be lampstands, which, as I explained as we were walking through chapter 11, I think that connects back with the idea from chapter 1 of Jesus walking among the lampstands, and the lampstands representing the churches. It represents the churches being the light of the world. And these 2 witnesses in their own right are lights to the world to prophesy in the name of the Lord from Jerusalem in chapter 11. So I think that is where that all connects. Looping back to Zechariah, let's move to chapter 5, verses 5 through 11. And the angel who was speaking to me went out, and he said to me, "Please look up, see what's going out." And I asked, "What is that?" And he said, "This is a basket going out." And he said, "This is their iniquity throughout all the earth." And look, the lead cover was lifted, and a woman was sitting inside the basket. And he said, "This is wickedness." And he thrust her back down into the basket and threw the lead cover on top of it. And I looked up and saw, and look, two women coming forward, and the wind was in their wings, and they had wings like those of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between the earth and the sky. And I asked the angel who was talking to me, where are they taking the basket? And he said to me, to build for it a house in the land of Shinar. And when it is put in place, it will be placed there on its site. The land of Shinar is a reference to the same area as Babylon. It gets that connection through Genesis when, after the flood, the people make their dwelling in the land of Shinar, and it is there where they begin building the Tower of Babel. Babel, the name Babel, is the same as the word for Babylon. So this all connects Shinar to Babylon, and that is where they're taking this woman of wickedness in the basket into the wilderness and the land of Shinar. I believe this is anticipating the picture that John gets of the woman in Revelation 17. There's not an exact quotation of words as there is for the seven eyes ranging throughout the earth, for example, but we do read about a wicked woman in Babylon representing wickedness itself. Here's Revelation 17, verses 1 through 5. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed sexual immorality, and those who live on the earth became drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. And he carried me away into the wilderness in the spirit, and I saw a woman seated on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, holding a golden cup in her hand full of detestable things and the unclean things of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the detestable things of the earth. I think we have the anticipation, at least, of this picture in Revelation 17 from the vision in Zechariah chapter 5. We have more horses in Zechariah chapter 6 and chariots. Let's read Zechariah chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. I looked up again, and I saw, and look, 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. With the first chariot there were red horses, and with the second chariot there were black horses, and with the third chariot there were white horses, and with the fourth chariot there were strong dappled horses. And I answered and said to the angel that was talking to me, what are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said to me, these are the 4 winds of the heavens going out after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth. The one with the black horses is going to the north country, and the white horses go after them, while the dappled ones go to the south country. When the strong horses went out, they were anxious to go to patrol the earth. And he said, go, patrol the earth, and they patrolled the earth. Notice how the horses are all these different colors that do correspond more closely with the 4 colors of the horses in Revelation 6, 1 through 8. The horses in chapter 6 are also associated with directions, at least north and south, and there is some textual critical commentary on that verse that says the white horses go after them. The phrase go after them might be a reference to the west. The wording in Hebrew is a little bit ambiguous on terms of what it means to go after them, and there are some that think that this is indicating a westerly direction by the wording in the Hebrew. And they are coming from between the 2 mountains. That would mean that coming through the mountains would be an indication that they're already coming from the east. So there's an implication of east, there's explicitly north and south, and there might be west as well. But in any case, these 4 horses in Zechariah 6 are to patrol the earth. That would mean that they go to all 4 corners of the earth in order to patrol. And the 4 horses in Revelation chapter 6 are sent by the 4 living creatures. As I discussed in my commentary on chapter 6, I think the four living creatures themselves represent the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And so for each of the four living creatures to call and send each of the four horses suggests that they also are associated with the four cardinal directions. The colors in Zechariah 6 match much more closely to Revelation 6 as well. And I believe that we can also make a connection in Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind could blow on the earth or on the sea or on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, holding the seal of the living God, and he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels who were given permission to damage the earth and the sea, saying, "Do not damage the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the slaves of our God on their foreheads." I concur with some scholars who see the connection of the four winds to the description from Zechariah chapter 6, when the angel says, "These chariots and horses are the four winds of the heavens going out." I believe that explains the reference to the winds in Revelation 7:1, that the four angels and the horses and the riders, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as they're called, are the winds that are being held back and then told to wait to dispense the judgments that they have been entrusted with until after the sealing of the slaves of God, as it's put there in 7 verse 3. We're going to skip to Zechariah chapter 11, verses 15 through 17. And I believe it's at this point we start to see some connections to the story of the beast from the sea all the way through the millennium. In Zechariah 11, 15 through 17, we read, "And Yahweh said to me, Take again the implements of a foolish shepherd. For look, I am raising up a shepherd in the land who will not attend to the ones that are perishing. He will not seek the young man. He will not heal the ones that are crushed, and he will not sustain the healthy ones. He will devour the flesh of the fattened ones and tear apart even their hooves. Woe, my worthless shepherd, who deserts the flock. May a sword fall on his arm and on his right eye. May his arm wither completely and his right eye be utterly blinded." The reference to hooves there and the ones that are crushed and are healthy, those are in the picture of the metaphor. They're the sheep. There are healthy sheep. There are some sick sheep. There are some fat sheep. And this bad shepherd, foolish shepherd, is going to mistreat them all. I believe we have in this picture that God has ordained a time when there will be a king who mistreats the people under him. That would be a connection then to the beast from the sea. In Revelation 13, 5 through 7, we read about this beast in some details. A mouth was given him, speaking great things and blasphemies, and authority to act was given to him for 42 months. And he opened his mouth for blasphemies toward God, to blaspheme his name and his dwelling, those who live in heaven. And it was given him to make war with the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to him over every tribe and people and language and nation. Here is a man who is like the foolish shepherd. He's given authority over good and bad sheep, sheep that are healthy and sheep that are not. This Antichrist is going to abuse them all, and he will specifically make war on the saints. Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 through 9. "Look, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of reeling for all the surrounding nations. It will also be against Judah in the siege against Jerusalem. And then on that day I will make Jerusalem a stone weight for all the peoples. All those lifting it up will grievously hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will assemble against it. On that day, declares Yahweh, I will strike every horse with confusion, and the one riding it with madness. But over the house of Judah I will keep my eyes open, and I will strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. And the clans of Judah will say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are a strength to us, through Yahweh of hosts, their God. On that day I will make the clans of Judah like a pan of fire among sticks of wood, and like a torch of fire among stalks of grain. And they will devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding peoples. And Jerusalem will be inhabited again in its place, in Jerusalem. And Yahweh will save the tents of Judah first, so that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not be exalted over Judah. On that day, Yahweh will put a shield around the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And the one who stumbles among them on that day will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of Yahweh, before them. And then on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations coming against Jerusalem. There's a lot going on here. I think we might be able to connect this passage to what is going on with, say, the 144,000 who are gathered on Mount Zion, which is in Jerusalem, and with the two witnesses also prophesying in Jerusalem. This is a picture of Jerusalem and the surrounding area, the cities of Judah, being a antagonizing force to the cities around them. As we read, they will devour to the right and left all the surrounding people. It will become a cup of reeling for the surrounding nations. Whatever's going on in Jerusalem is going to have a negative, adverse effect on the people around Jerusalem. But the people in and near Jerusalem are going to feel a special protection. On that day, Yahweh will put a shield around the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I feel like this description matches pretty well with what we read about those two witnesses and what's going on with Jerusalem during the time of their preaching. And if you'll recall, I think this is also happening about the same time as the bowl judgments, which means the bowl judgments are getting poured out on Babylon and on some of the wicked around, while in Jerusalem we have the 144,000, I think, also pictured as these two witnesses. We have the Christians who do have a kind of supernatural protection for a period of time. I'll read Revelation 11, verses 3 through 6, and then I want to loop in a little bit of verse 10 because it explains what's going on with them a little bit. I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, dressed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire comes out of their mouth and consumes their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them in this way, he must be killed. These have the authority to shut the sky so that it does not rain during the days of their prophecy, and they have the authority over the waters to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they wish. And we read in verse 10, at the end of that verse, these two prophets tormented those who live on the earth. And to clarify, the context is that these two prophets are not tormenting people maliciously. They are tormenting the wicked. That's why I connect this with the bowl judgments, which I believe also torment the wicked. And these prophets are connected to it. Jerusalem, as it is lived in by these prophets and by the 144,000 with the Lamb, I believe is a picture of what Zechariah is describing in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 through 9. And this loops in the fact that it isn't just restricted to Jerusalem itself, but includes some of the surrounding area, which would make some sense that people are having an influence beyond just the walls of the one city, but it is happening elsewhere, and people are noticing it, and people are responding to it, which is one reason why the beast feels like he needs to come and attack Jerusalem, because that is seen as the source of the torment that he is enduring. In Zechariah chapter 12, a little bit further on, we have this prophecy, verses 10 through 14. I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, and they will look to me whom they pierced, and they shall mourn over him as one wails over an only child, and they will grieve bitterly over him as one grieves bitterly over a firstborn. On that day, the wailing will be great in Jerusalem, like the wailing for Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, each clan by itself, the clan of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, the clan of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves, the clan of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves, the clan of the Shimeites by itself, and their wives by themselves, and all those clans remaining, each clan by itself, and their wives by themselves. It does seem to strike an odd chord that there would be talk about mourning here after this description of Jerusalem having special protection. But it seems that this is simply a picture that when the end times arrive, there will be a mixed response to Jesus, some responding with faith and some not. There also could be the idea that during the time of the beast, there is reason for mourning because he is persecuting and killing Christians. So there is mourning in Jerusalem, even though Jerusalem may be a place where God's protection is found, yet also there are people who have lost loved ones to the persecution of that bad shepherd in the context of Zechariah, or the beast from the sea in the context of Revelation. And so there could be mourning there. The first couple of verses, though, that speak of looking on me, whom they have pierced, and mourning over him, gets picked up on very early in the book of Revelation. In chapter 1, verse 7, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even every one who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. Yes, amen. This wording of seeing the one who pierced him comes straight from Zechariah, and the tribes mourning him. Interestingly, in Zechariah, the emphasis is on the Israelite tribes, and not the standard ones, but the tribe of David, the tribe of Nathan, who was a prophet, some of the other tribes, and then it says all the rest, which could include the non-Israelite clans or tribes of the earth. And I think that may be looping in where we have it in Revelation 1:7, all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. Jesus' coming is definitely responded with a mixture of responses, one with joy and one of fear that the wrath of God is being poured out. So I believe we see Christ and respond in different ways. On the one hand, it will be a great matter of rejoicing for those who are faithful to him, and on the other, it will be a reason for mourning because of the judgment he will bring. Let's move on to Zechariah 13, verses 7 through 9. O sword, awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my associate, declares Yahweh of hosts. Strike the shepherd so that the sheep may be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the small ones. And then in all the land, declares Yahweh, 2/3 will be cut off and perish, and 1/3 will be left alive in it. And I will bring the remaining third into the fire, and I will refine them like one refines silver, and I will test them like one tests gold. They will call my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, Yahweh is my God. This is one of the verses that is cited in the New Testament, in the Gospels, as applying to Christ's sacrifice as the one who is struck. Strike the shepherd so that the sheep may be scattered is applied to Jesus at one point. But I think we can see in the context that it is a little ambiguous. Jesus was the shepherd, and when he was struck and killed on the cross, his followers scattered. And that's the way it's used in the Gospels, is to talk about the scattering of the disciples when Jesus was crucified. But here in Zechariah, I think it could refer to that foolish shepherd, and he's talking about the fact that eventually he is going to strike that shepherd, that evil, foolish one, and scatter the followers of that bad shepherd. And then he's going to have a period of testing in which 2/3 will perish and 1/3 will be left alive. And those that are left alive will be ones that are faithful and who come to Christ. There's not a lot of direct connection here, but the idea that things are going to happen in partial amounts may be underlying this idea that there are some that are going to follow and some that will not, and it will not be an even match, but there will be these thirds. We see something like that in Revelation 16, and I point to it because it is in the context of these other events that do follow along with the beast coming, and we're about to get there with chapter 14 in a big way. And so this reference to a third may be behind the reference to a third in Revelation 16, verses 17 through 19, at the consequences of an earthquake. The seventh angel poured out his bowl on the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were lightnings and sounds and thunders, and there was a great earthquake, as has not happened from the time humanity has been on the earth. So great in this way was the earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his furious wrath. I explained as we were walking through this passage that I think the great city in this particular context is still Jerusalem, which was mentioned as a great city earlier. And Babylon is not the same as Jerusalem, but it has its own part to play. It will drink the cup of God's furious wrath separately, but the great city was split into 3 parts, whereas all the rest of the cities of the nations fell completely. Jerusalem was split into 3. That could be a reference back to Zechariah's thirds, and the reason why it's split and doesn't fall completely is because there are some faithful. Jerusalem is a place where there are both faithful residents and wicked residents, and this is going to shake it out to separate the wicked from the righteous, and it divides the city into thirds, somewhat like the passage from Zechariah. I know it's a little bit of a stretch there, and I am not going to say this is a hill I'll die on, that this is a specific reference to Zechariah here in Revelation 16, but it is one of the only places to find a reference to thirds. Now, let's get to chapter 14, which I believe has some direct bearing on what is going to unfold in chapters 19 and 20 in the book of Revelation. First couple of verses, Zechariah 14, 1 through 2. Look, a day is coming for Yahweh when your plunder will be divided in your midst. I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, and they will loot the houses, and the women will be raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the remainder of the people will not be cut off from the city. Here's another point of distinction. It was thirds. In the last verse here, we have the city divided into halves. Half of it will go into exile, the remainder will not. I believe it is talking about the siege of Jerusalem when the nations gather against Jerusalem. But notice that when they gather against Jerusalem, they are successful at capturing the city. Revelation does not give us much picture of the city being captured. It talks about the beast going to Jerusalem in chapter 16 and then being defeated by Jesus in chapter 19. But I think to find the picture that Zechariah gives us of the nations coming in against Jerusalem and succeeding in capturing her requires us to loop in chapter 11 as well. That's why I believe that the story of the 2 witnesses connects with the unfolding story of the beast from the sea and his attack on Jerusalem that starts in chapter 16. To read chapter 16 and 11 in chronological order, as I understand it, I pull out the passages this way. Revelation 16, verses 12 through 14. The 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, in order that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are the spirits of demons performing signs that go out to the kings of the whole inhabited world to gather them for the battle of the great day of God the all-powerful. I wanted to pick up this phrase, to gather them for battle of the great day of God the All-Powerful, because that is the context of Zechariah 14 as well. I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. This is the great day of the Lord that Zechariah is describing in chapter 14, and that is the battle that these kings are preparing for in Revelation 16. But between Revelation 16 and 19, they kind of disappear. Why? Because our attention is refocused on Babylon, which I do not believe is Jerusalem, but a separate place in the historical geographic area of Babylon, the capital of the beast. And so while our attention is focused on Babylon, things are happening back in Jerusalem, things that are described briefly in chapter 11 with the two witnesses. That's chapter 11, verses 7 through 10. When they, the witnesses, have completed their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will make war with them and will conquer them and will kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is called symbolically Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. And those from peoples and tribes and languages and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and they will not allow the dead bodies to be placed in a tomb. And those who live on the earth will rejoice over them and will celebrate and will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who live on the earth. We need chapter 11 to close the loop in Revelation with what's going on in Zechariah 14, verses 1 and 2. The success of the nations of the earth against Jerusalem. A success, though, that is only temporary, because Zechariah continues, Zechariah 14, 3 through 5. Then Yahweh will go forth and fight against those nations, like when he fights on a day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in half from east to west by a very great valley, and half of the mountain will withdraw toward the north, and the other half toward the south. And you will flee by the valley of my mountains, because the valley of the mountains will reach to Azal, and you will flee like you fled from the earthquake in the days of King Uzziah of Judah. And Yahweh my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. Is very closely aligned with Jesus returning with the hosts of heaven in Revelation 19. And what Zechariah describes of Yahweh in the person of Christ standing on the Mount of Olives is not described in Revelation, but we can easily imagine that as he comes back on his horse, that he comes down towards Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives and perhaps stands on the Mount of Olives. The picture is of Christ intervening in the battle at Jerusalem. There are some other elements to Zechariah's description. Now, skip down to verse 12 and pick up some more of the victory. This is Zechariah 14, 12 through 15. And this will be the plague with which Yahweh will strike all the peoples that fight against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. And then on that day, a great panic from Yahweh will fall on them, and they will seize one another's hand, and the hand of the one will be raised against the hand of another. And Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be collected, gold and silver and garments in great abundance. Like this plague will be the plague on the horse, the mule, the camel, and the donkey, and every kind of animal in those camps. This picture of chaos might be what is meant when in Revelation we read of Jesus killing all the rest with the sword of his mouth. We don't get much description of what that is like in practical terms, but it may be that Jesus speaks a word and we have this, the flesh rotting where they're standing, their eyes rotting in their sockets. They just immediately die and rot away. For some reason, the picture from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark comes to mind, where they open the Ark of the Covenant and then everybody's face starts to melt. And they just sort of all die in the smoke that comes out of the Ark. Well, maybe it's something like that from Zechariah's description. But it's put like this in Revelation chapter 20, verses 19 and 21. I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war with the one who was seated on the horse and with his army. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who performed the signs before him, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who had worshipped his image. The two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur, and the rest were killed by the sword of the one who was seated on the horse, the sword that comes out of his mouth. And all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. I think that is where we have some connection there, but let's move on. Zechariah has a bit more to say about Jerusalem in the wake of this victory. Zechariah chapter 14, verses 8 through 11. And then on that day, living waters will flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern shore and the other half to the western sea. And it will happen both in the summer and in the winter. And Yahweh will be king over all the earth. On that day, Yahweh will be one and his name one. All the land will be transformed into a desert plateau from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But it will rise up high, and it will stay in its place from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate, up to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. And they will dwell in it, and there will be no more ban imposed, and Jerusalem will dwell in security. We may have just a hint about Satan being thrown into the abyss with the idea that there is no more ban. Ban being an idea of things they were so opposed to God that they would have to be completely destroyed in order to be devoted to him. And that says there will be no more ban, and Jerusalem will dwell in security. He continues with this picture of the life in Jerusalem after this battle in chapter 14, verses 20 through 21. On that day, there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, Holy to Yahweh. And the cooking pots in the house of Yahweh will be holy, like the sacrificial basins before the altar. And every cooking pot in Jerusalem and Judah will be holy to Yahweh of hosts. And all those who sacrifice will come and will take from them and will cook in them, and there will be no longer a traitor in the house of Yahweh of hosts on that day. The idea of being a trader in the house of Yahweh is a little obscure, but basically it means that nobody who's going to be taking advantage of a situation like the money changers in Jesus' day and trying to use their position to abuse others. That's not going to happen, not after this battle is complete. And the picture is that everything is holy because everything is devoted to the Lord. Life itself, the basic rhythms of life, are going to be completely aligned with the worship of God and the life that God has designed. And so everything will be holy because life in Jerusalem will be all about God and living with him. In Revelation 20, verse 4, we read about Christ as king over the earth. I saw thrones, and they sat down on them, and authority to judge was granted to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of the testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and did not receive the mark on their forehead and on their hand, and they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Of course, there are many passages in Revelation that talk about Christ being the king and of creating a kingdom of priests. And this is just one in the immediate context of chapter 20 and of the battle. Christ reigns with his saints there in Jerusalem. In chapter 22, verses 1 through 3, we get the picture of the water of life, the river flowing from Jerusalem. He showed me the river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming out from the throne of God and of the Lamb in the middle of its street. And on both sides of the river is the tree of life, producing 12 fruits, yielding its fruit according to every month. River would flow winter and summer, like all the time. It was a constant source. And that is the picture here of the tree, providing food as a constant source all year round. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, and there will not be any curse any longer. And the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his slaves will serve him. The phrasing about not being any curse any longer may connect back with the Zechariah's comment about not having anything under the ban. There is nothing except that which is already devoted holiness to the Lord. Well, this brings us to the very last bit of Zechariah that I want to talk about, which I think explains a little bit about what we're going to see after the millennium is over. Because during the millennium, there are nations that are not celebrating Yahweh. Even though in Jerusalem and in the immediate surrounding, everything is devoted to the Lord, there are still nations that do not submit to God's rule. This is made very clear in Zechariah chapter 14, verses 16 through 19. Then every survivor from all those nations coming against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and celebrate the Feast of Booths. And then whoever of the clans of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, it will not rain on them. And if the clan of Egypt will not go up and come in, on them will be that plague Yahweh inflicts on the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. This will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. Here in Zechariah, the Feast of Booths and celebrating that in Jerusalem becomes a litmus test for one's loyalty to Yahweh. And there are people who fail that test, who do not go up and worship. But these do not seem to be the nations that were immediately involved in the battle at Jerusalem, because Zechariah 14:16 says, every survivor from the nations that came against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King. It's like they learned their lesson. If you were anywhere near Jerusalem when all this went down, you were going to be loyal. But there are nations at a distance from the immediate surroundings that may not have gotten the message and still refuse to worship Yahweh. They do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths, and they will find punishment in that time. Punishment in order to spur repentance and to prompt them to come to loyalty to Yahweh and loyalty to Christ, the Messiah. But it does imply that there are nations out there who are not doing it. But I wanted to get to this because I think it helps to answer, where do Gog and Magog come from? Well, according to Zechariah, there are nations out there not bowing the knee to Yahweh. That is going to form the basis for what happens next in Revelation 20. Thank you again for joining me in this overview of the intertextuality between Zechariah and Revelation. I hope you find it enlightening and helpful as you study from either one of these two books. I look forward to meeting with you again when we can examine the treasures in the biblical text.